Okay. Okay, so welcome again. This is a Movement for African Emancipation book discussion series discussing class struggle in Africa by Kwame Nkrumah. Today we are looking at chapter 1, only chapter 1, which is a short chapter. So just to give some context to this book, it was published in 1970, 4 years after Dr. Nkrumah was removed in a military coup in Ghana, after having led Ghana to independence in 1957 and being a key leader in the Pan-Africanist movement in Africa. So it reflects Nkrumah's evolution, because he himself evolved in his thinking, following his his own struggles for independence and what happened after the coup and so on. So he had a belief that after colonialism, Africa could easily establish socialism through reform rather than revolution, due to Africa being indigenously socialist. He thought it was simply a need to establish independence for African countries, and there would be an easy move to socialism. But after the coup, he came to believe that class struggle was now fundamental in Africa, and revolution was key to bringing socialism to Africa, especially since after the flag independence, the so-called independence, Africa remained subservient under a new neo-colonialist system. So Africa was not really free, and they would take a class struggle against the neo-colonialist system and those representing it to have true freedom. So, in the introduction to the book, Nkrumah explains that there is a wide difference in Africans' political, social, and economic conditions. This is similar to what Walter Rodney described as uneven development in his book How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So, despite this, in spite of Africa's socio-economic and political diversity, it is possible to discern certain common political, social, and economic conditions and problems. These derive from traditional past, common aspirations, and from shared experience under imperialism, colonialism, and neo-colonialism. There is no part of the continent which has not known oppression and exploitation, and no part which remains outside the processes of the African Revolution. So that was a quote from Nkrumah. So, just as across the entire world, Africa has seen the processes of a class struggle. Of course, class lines became blurred in the struggle against colonialism as people united for national freedom. People point to Africa's egalitarian traditions, but following independence, the class struggle has been intense. So we see remnants of communal value system. We can see the evolution, roughly speaking, in Africa, to having from African communal to a proto-feudal society, to now, fully capitalist now. So again, Nkrumah says Africa has in its midst a hardcore of bourgeoisie who are analogous to colonists and settlers in that they live in positions of privilege, a small, selfish, money-minded, reactionary minority among vast masses of exploited and oppressed people. Their survival depends on foreign support. In the book, I don't know if you can see very clearly the graphic there. The privileged classes consist of the bureaucratic bourgeoisie, officers of armed forces and police, intelligentsia, professional class, compradors, and so on. And this is all operating under the system of neo-colonialism, which we have moved from following colonialism. At the other end of the class struggle, we have the workers, the peasants, small farmers, and traders. So, with that context established, we move into chapter 1, which is origins of class in Africa. So how did these classes come about? What was the situation before this, and how can this change in the sense of having no more exploitation? First of all, we look understanding Africa. Africa is a huge continent, of course. Africa can contain within it Europe, United States, China, basically. So this compact and rich continent has evolved a wide variety of highly sophisticated political systems many centuries before colonialism. We can look at an example describing, the systems in Africa historically. The political ideology of indigenous African political systems and institutions from antiquity to the 19th century. Highly advanced and sophisticated African civilizations, cultures, societies, and states, such as ancient Egypt, Kush, Nubia, Aksum, Ghana, Mali, and Ashanti, evolved throughout the continent from the 9th century before the Christian era to the 19th century CE. African political systems and institutions were traditionally based on kinship and lineage, i.e., common ancestry, sanctioned by a founding myth. The lineage was a powerful and effective force for unity and stability in ancient Africa. Each lineage had its head chosen on the basis of age, maturity, and relation to ancestors. The old, respectfully referred to as elders, were often chosen as lineage heads because old age was usually associated with wisdom. Each ethnic group had its own system of government. And there is another illustration of how sophisticated African systems were is this extract from the Mandate Charter, which is from Mali. Every individual has a right to life and to defend his or her personal integrity. Consequently, any attempt at taking someone else's life will be punished by death. In addition to their daily chores, women must be involved in all levels of government. Vanity is a sign of weakness and humility a sign of greatness. In Mali, never mistreat a foreigner. In Mali, the envoy is always safe. And this is quite a detailed charter of rights before even the Europeans could consider such. And this was in 1240. The political maturity of African masses may be traced to economic and social patterns of earlier times. Again, referring to Walter Rodney, who says the base impacts the superstructure. The economic base impacts the superstructure. And if this is the case, then this political maturity must reflect a developed economy. Under communalism, which is the economic system practiced, land and other means of production was owned in common. Chiefs were strictly controlled by councillors and were removable. We look at traditional chieftaincy systems. We have consensual systems. We've already referred to the age-set systems, village kinship systems. Chiefs had limited checks and balances, or strong checks and balances. There were grassroots chiefs in these systems. Of course, we had an evolution in some places to absolute systems. Even there, you can find, like in Yoruba constitutional monarchy, there were strong checks and balances. And some parts of Africa didn't even have chiefs. For example, in most parts of Igbo land, where warrant chiefs were created by the colonialists. So, in history, we have 5 major types of production relationships. This again was discussed by Rodney in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Communalism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, socialism, and communism being the highest stage. It was when communalism gave way to private property relations that class struggle began. And in Africa, some of these stages existed side by side at the time of colonialism. So you have communalism with some kind of proto-feudal relationship being existing, or feudal relationships. You had some form of slavery, and so on together. So, and one thing, despite this being a stage that signifies higher and better, each stage does not signify better exactly. It has, so capitalism isn't better than feudalism necessarily, or it has more economic productivity than the previous stage, with also attendant inequality and exploitation. Of course, the exploitation is key to why these systems have to give way over time to a system without exploitation, as used to be the case. So we moved from communalism to exploitation. At the time of colonialism, much of Africa was passing through the higher stage of communalism. Tribal democracy was disintegrating and feudal relationships were emerging, including hereditary tribal chieftaincies and monarchical systems. Because we have something referred to Ubuntu, I am because you are, we are, which describes, the system of communalism that was being practiced. So imperialism and colonialism brought about the collapse of these communalist socio-economic patterns due to the introduction of export crops such as cocoa and coffee, which we also call cash crops. With global capitalist interconnection, private ownership and individualism became entrenched. I should also note that cash crops is a system in which foreign capital is being used to develop this extraction of crops from Africa to benefit the countries that bring in this foreign capital. So foreign capital plays a key role in that. So with this now, the collective spirit declined. Private farming and the method of small commodity production replaced communalist land ownership. Where land was still communally owned, it became easy for the white settlers to steal the land. In places like Malawi, Nkrumah describes the case, Malawi example. Any lands not owned privately became British Crown lands, that is in British-controlled Africa. Communal ownership of land was abolished and ownership of land was imposed by law, and so we now have to have something called a certificate of ownership. And now in the modern day, we are having for modern colonialism. With regards to land, our land is still being stolen and taken away. As this news item discusses, government and investment funds are buying up farmland in Africa and Asia to grow food. This is a profitable business. The high-stake games of real-life monopoly is leading to a modern colonialism to which many poor countries submit out of necessity. So land is out of the people's hands, and more is only for few, and it is increasingly foreign, directly foreign. Theft of land and natural resources, which are the means of production, leads to the creation of European exploiter and African exploited during the time of colonialism, of course. With subsistence agriculture destroyed, Africans were forced to sell their labor power at exploitative wages. Now, in this case, we can compare how serfs in Europe, in European capitalism, provided the bulk of exploited labor, exploited workers. In Africa, there were no ready-made serfs because Africa wasn't feudalist as such, and hadn't created this class of serfs. Serfs who are people who have to work on the land for some landowner and depend on and are very poor. So with capitalism, there was this ready-made workforce. So in Africa, the colonialists had to create those who had no choice but to sell their labor by destroying the subsistence agriculture that Africans relied on. Capitalism developed with colonialism. Single crop economies, completely dependent on foreign capital, made this colony a sphere for investment and exploitation. And through the system of indirect rule, now having established economic supremacy over Africans, you need a political system to maintain it. We have the system of indirect rule that was traditionally practiced in colonialism, ruling on behalf of the colonialists, and chiefs became tools and agents of the colonial administration. The picture here sees the creation of warrant chiefs, which I mentioned earlier, were newly created to support colonialist rule. Petty bourgeoisie and urban bourgeois class of bureaucrats, reactionary intellectuals, traders, and others developed with the spread of private enterprise and to serve the needs of the colonial administrative apparatus. So we have a class developing out of all this during colonialism, and this is the class that maintains after the colonialists leave. Colonialism led to restoration and preservation of obsolete forms of social relations and hampered organic cultural development. Capitalist methods of production and social relationships were introduced. Tribal frictions, or what I would prefer to call ethnic nationality frictions, were deliberately encouraged in some cases where it served the interest of the colonialists. Now, colonialism supposedly built infrastructure in Africa. Roads, ports, railways were built, but these were just to service the extractive industry, capitalist farming and plantations. So there was no concern for the welfare of the people who under colonialist rule. And much of the continent was left with little infrastructure. Development of capitalism and industry undermined feudal, semi-feudal relationships as an industrial and agricultural working class developed. Then the struggle was a race class struggle. The enemy was a particular race. This blurred the existence of the local and true class enemy that would exist after independence, which was created during this process, the indigenous capitalist class. Frantz Fanon says, the cause is the consequence. You are rich because you are white because you are rich. This is as it was under colonialism. So at independence in much of Africa, there was a coercive state machinery, which was disguised by a parliamentary democracy. An elite of bureaucrats ran the state with unlimited power. There was an intelligentsia indoctrinated with Western values. The police and army had an officer corps largely trained in the West, and we had a chieftaincy that had been used to administer for colonialism at the local level. And this point now is very important because when we look at our current conditions, people really do not go to the root of it. Understand that what we operate under now is a legacy of colonialism, and any change has to be directed at how to uproot the system completely. So there is no surprise, therefore, that with what we had set up, we're going to have a false, incomplete independence, which is what we call the mere flag independence. Yet, at the time of the imperialist leaving, the class struggle had intensified. A new grassroots political leadership emerged during the independence struggle, which aimed to go beyond political freedom to a complete transformation of society based on socialism and rejection of class exploitation as the route to true independence. I would like to play a video of Kwame Nkrumah speaking.
It is easy to see that the imperialists and the colonialists are determined to retain the African countries in the position of suppliers of cheap raw materials. If we do not resist this threat, and if we throw in our lot with the common market, we shall doom the economy of Africa to a state of perpetual subjection to the economy of Western Europe. This will, of course, hinder the industrialization of our young African states. It is impossible to think of economic development and national independence without possessing an unfettered capacity for maintaining a strong industrial power.